Yeah, sure, I can put that on. Why not? Yeah, this is super official. This is.
This is what you're going to be known for on the internet.
This better not be going to the internet. This is the original Flame War. I'm quite prepared for the internet's response to this.
I'm going to reference this.
We've got 13 subscribers, I think.
13. Okay, that's yeah. So once you put Emacs versus Vim onto the once that's SEO'd, once that's search engine optimized, it will be all over it. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Are we good?
I don't want to go into
I've put this thing on now. I've got no idea what it's actually doing. I don't know if it's working or whether it's just. I was about to say it's just to give it a bit of more of authority.
Either way.
No, but they can embarrass themselves.
So, quick show of hands. Who uses Vim on a day-to-day basis? Okay, quick show of hands. Who's used Vim? Okay, quick show of hands. Who uses Emacs on a day-to-day basis? Okay, quick show of hands. Who has used Emacs? Oh, okay, all right, good. I did wonder whether that would be the case, that not many people have used Emacs, so that's good. So what I'm going to talk to you guys about, I guess, is why I love Emacs, because I do love Emacs, and I would never ever use Vim if I had an Emacs install available to me. Each their own, but that's my corner. So that's what I'm going to that's what I'm fighting for. But because I did have a suspicion that not many people would have used Emacs, part of what I was thinking I would do is actually kind of show people Emacs so that they can kind of get a sense of actually what it is. But I also want to talk a little bit about, I think it's always worth talking a little bit about history, because although we're quite a young industry, we do have some history, and talking a little bit about where Emacs came from, kind of, I guess, gives us a little bit of context about what's going on. I guess every good presentation should start with some humor. Who reads XKCD? Again, come on, guys. Honestly. Okay, so not many is the answer. I guess this kind of sums up, though, the editor war kind of thing on the internet, right? Which is that, everybody's got their preferred editor, but it's not just your preferred editor. It's like real programmers use your editor of choice. But what I quite liked about it, I'll let you guys read it. But I thought the classic thing at the bottom here was like, damn it, Emacs tries to do everything for you.
Yeah.
Oh, zoom in. Can I zoom in? There's enough laughter in the room to tell me that no one really gets it, which is because not enough people use Emacs, which is absolutely fine, which is why I wanted to talk about it. The key thing here is this CXMCM butterfly kind of thing, which is definitely Emacs talk, and unless you've used Emacs, it probably won't mean anything to you at all. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Who's heard of Emacs Pinky? Oh man, okay, all right. So there's plenty to talk about. Okay, all right. So what is Emacs?
It's like an operating system.
The joke goes, Emacs is a great operating system. It just needs a decent editor. So indeed, Emacs is obviously it's a text editor, but it's much more than just a text editor, and that kind of is both the advantage and the challenge of Emacs. But anyway, that's Emacs. So it's actually probably, what do you say? When you first open up Emacs, well, you'll get the help screen, but this is probably the most familiar place to start with in Emacs. So it's a text editor, but we'll talk a little bit more about what it does and how it came to be. What is Emacs? So there's a whole there's a whole bunch of different, I guess, forks of Emacs, but the one that you should all be using is GNU Emacs. Everyone's familiar, I hope, with GNU. Yes, no, sort of, a little bit. So, you know, back in the good old days, there was Unix, I guess Unix kind of has its own sort of reputation of being a bit geeky and whatever. But of course, it's what all great operating systems are built on. For example, most of us here are using macOS, I guess, right, which is basically a fork of BSD, which is one of the flavors of Unix. And so, you know, Unix is kind of the beginning of many things for us. But GNU obviously stands for GNU is not Unix. So you used to have to, you used to have to pay for Unix. And the Free Software Foundation came out and said, look, that's not cool. We shouldn't have to pay for software. Who started off the Free Software Foundation? Good, Richard Stallman. So RMS, yeah, Richard Stallman was really the kind of I mean, he had a lot of, he kind of kicked off the Free Software Foundation. He started the GNU project. He published the GNU public license, is it, the GPL, and all of these kind of things. So one of the greats of free and open source software. He's got a website. He's an activist. If you read his website, there's some interesting stuff in there. I'll let you guys have a look at that in your own time when you're ready. On the Wikipedia site, here's a picture of the man himself. I'll let you draw your own conclusions. He's a unique character, but he is kind of recognised as one of the one of the greats of software engineering and of free software. So he wrote most of GNU Emacs. So that's all his work. Not entirely his work. Going back even further in history, one of the first editors that you can kind of find is the TICO editor, which TICO standing for Tape Editor and Corrector, which eventually became Text Editor and Corrector. So this text editor was for when people were building software on bits of paper tape, not even magnetic tape. It was paper tape. This was the editor that people were using. It was good question. It was in that time. I don't know. But that's how far back in computing we're talking about. TICO was basically the fundamental building blocks of Emacs, because the next thing that happened with TICO is that what happened was, I guess, on top of TICO, people started building macros, which were like, I mean, oh, you're right, Alan. I think he's okay. I think
he's so Emacs.
What's my train of thought? Are you okay, Alan? Yeah, he's hard as nails. He's a winner. Basically, to make TICO a little bit more usable, people built a whole bunch of macros on top of it, and that was the beginning of Emacs, was the macros on top of that editor macros. That was kind of where it all started off. One of the first versions of Emacs was written by this guy, James Gosling. I don't know whether people in this room would know of James Gosling very well. Wrote Java. So he was, which is, it's been an important part of my software engineering history at any rate, and also, a great developer. So he wrote Gosling Emacs. So I guess it's an editor that you can still find. But Richard Stallman built GNU Emacs and basically rewrote Gosling Emacs. But nonetheless, that should give you kind of an idea of how long Emacs has been floating around. That does predate my time in software engineering. It may surprise some members of the room to know. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about kind of my interest in Emacs and where that came from. And I guess when I was, still learning, well, hopefully we're all still learning, but one of the early things that I was doing was I was reading some blogs, and I was reading a blog by a guy who worked for these people fairly early on in their history. And before he got headhunted to go to Google, I was kind of trawling the net and I found this blog, and it was quite an engaging blog, so I was quite enjoying reading it. He's published, there's a guy called Steve, I think I actually don't know how to pronounce his last name. It's Yegge. So I'm just going to leave it there as Stevie Y's blog rants. Anyway, while he was working at Amazon, he published just a whole bunch of his kind of thoughts, and I quite enjoyed reading them. One of the ones that he published, which was the beginning of my interest in Emacs, was his blog called Tour de Babel. And this is kind of why I found his writing quite engaging, because of course, Babel, Tower of Babel, it's when all this big biblical story of the explosion of languages. So in this, he kind of does a bit of a tour, and tour being the French word for tower, kind of goes through the different languages that he was using at the time. This is such an old thing. I don't know when he published this. This was like, I don't know, in the 90s sometimes. So he talks about C, talks about C++. He talks about Lisp. Lisp hackers in the room. I see one. Okay, I see one. Okay, so I was just reading. So he kind of talks about the pros and cons of different languages, and I was reading this. So what does he say? Like, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that he talks about, and I thought it was interesting. I'm going to skip some bits of it, but he says when Amazon got its start, we had brilliant engineers. I didn't know all of them, but I knew some of them. The original brilliant guys and gals here only allowed 2 languages in Amazon's hallowed source repository: C and Lisp. Go figure. They all used Emacs, of course. In fact, Eric Benson was one of the authors of Emacs, which is one of the forks of it. All of the greatest engineers of the world use Emacs. The world changer types. Not the great gal in the cube next to you, not Fred, the amazing guy down the hall. I'm talking about the greatest software developers of our profession, the ones who changed the face of the industry, the James Goslings, the Donald Knuths. Everyone knows Donald Knuth, right?
No.
Enough. Well, actually, I don't know. Obviously, no one knows them, but everyone knows of them. Okay, good. The Paul Grahams, and he's got a little number 2 here because, as it turns out, Paul Graham does not use Emacs. He uses Vim. And the James Wilsons, blah, blah, blah. Real engineers use Emacs. You have to be way smart to use it well, and it makes you incredibly powerful if you can master it. Emacs is the 100-year editor. Blah, blah, blah. So anyway, he goes and talks a little bit about how Emacs was used in Amazon. But anyway, he kind of goes on. Emacs is a genius. Blah, blah, blah. It's really great productivity. Emacs is the quality without a name. What is that name? But anyway, eventually he talks about how powerful Emacs is. So I had no exposure to Emacs. I don't think I'd even heard of Emacs at this point. But I was like, so obviously he's quite an engaging writer, and obviously there's quite a bit of salesman pitch in there, which is why I'm reading it out to you, because there's a bit of a salesman pitch in there. But anyway, religion isn't the opiate of the masses anymore, Carl. IDEs are. So basically, his whole thing was that the kind of the real founders of the software engineering industry used Emacs. So I haven't talked a great deal about what Emacs is. So let's keep going. Emacs has a long history with Lisp, and so a lot of people talk about Emacs as being a great kind of Lisp editor and interpreter. So a lot of what it does is all about Lisp. And when you open up Emacs and you come into this into the Scratch buffer, which is just like a scratch pad, it's like kind of a notepad. It's actually a Lisp interpreter. So you can start typing Lisp commands in there, and you can evaluate them, and you'll get a result. You'll get a result straight away. How are we doing for time? How much time do you need, Mark? You need a lot of time, don't you? Anyway, so maybe I was going to talk a little bit more about Lisp. Does anyone know of what do people know about Lisp?
Have an element.
Yep. And you don't have an element? List-based?
The AST is exactly the same as the language, so it's arguably the best language to write in. There's nothing between you and the execution of the language itself.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely right. So, you know, so one of the great things about Lisp is that its source code and its data are exactly the same. There's no actual distinction between the what you write and the data structures of the language. It's one of the kind of, not one of the, probably the original functional language. So when John McCarthy was writing it, and you can read through this, but it was really, one of the things that he was looking about was, it's in here somewhere, function definitions and lambda expressions. So it was kind of a way of taking mathematical notation and putting it into a programming language. And so that's where the lambda calculus comes up. And so when you hear about lambdas and whatever, they all kind of have their root in Lisp and the lambda calculus and you know, all of those good things. You can read about the lambda calculus. It's a thing. I won't go into it right now. I was hoping to talk about it a bit more. One of the obvious places to start if you want to learn a bit of Lisp is to start talking about Scheme. So Scheme is a Lisp implementation. One of the original textbooks, like so MIT, apparently when you did your introduction to computer science, you learned Scheme. That's what you learned Lisp. That was like the first thing that you learned when you were becoming when you're interested in computer science. And so what I thought we might do is look at some Scheme, but yeah, that's what I was going to do. Okay, all right. So at this point, let's talk a little bit about Emacs itself. So when you open up Emacs, probably if you install Emacs into Mac OS X right now, which is probably what most of us are using, you'll get like some kind of hooky graphical version, but no one wants that. You want to be in your terminal, and so you can, with a little bit of work, you can make sure that you load up something into the terminal. And the first place that you come into is the Scratch buffer. So this is just like a notepad. You can do whatever you want, but the key thing is that you're in a buffer and you can immediately start typing, hopefully with more accuracy than what I'm offering you here. I guess I wanted to mention just kind of one point of difference that I know from my very limited experience of Vim is that there's no kind of two modes to Emacs. You just kind of type, and then to issue commands, you need to know what the commands are, and then you can execute them. In terms of how you navigate around, that's where the real, I guess, well, part of where the real joy of Emacs, and I know this is the same as Vim, but nonetheless, this is kind of the real benefit of Emacs is that you can very quickly navigate around documents without having to pick up the mouse and move the cursor. So the trick is knowing what all of those are, and it takes a little while to get used to those. But it's like anything; once you know your shortcuts, they become muscle memory, and then it's all very quick. The reason people talk about Emacs Pinky is because to execute those commands, you almost always need to hit the Control key and then follow it with another letter, and that will give you some kind of command. The other thing that you need to do is use the meta key, which is often written as an M plus another letter. And the combination of control something and meta something allows you to run commands and also navigate around your buffer with whatever you're doing. So obviously, to move to the beginning of the line, I just go Control A and I'm there, or to the end of the line, it's Control E. To move back a letter, it's Control B, will take you back, and forward a letter is Control F. Back a word is Meta B, forward a word is Meta F. To those,
Could you go like 3 words back?
I could if I wanted to. I think it's, I would have to insert the number of times that I want that command repeated, and then I could do that. Actually, what I should probably do is move to, let's try.
How easy is it to quit
Or can you? You can't admit, right?
Yeah.
Control X, Control C will quit Emacs for you.
What about the X button? Will that
So this is my shortcut for Emacs. Here's so that's the help page. So what was it? So to get out of Emacs is Control X, Control C, and then it's gone.
The winner is.
Nonetheless, I guess that is important. So you can again, like any editor, you can split windows. So I've got two windows open here, and so if I'm in here, I guess to go to find something is just Control S. So I want to kind of go to source, so it's there, and repeat hitting that will take me through. To go backwards is Control R. So now I want to find that function. Oops, can't spell. That's there. And the reason I want to talk about that a little bit is because there's a pro tip here. If I go Control, so if I want to look back in my my terminal history, of course I press Control R and then I can start searching. It's exactly the same command as in Emacs. If you want to look backwards in the document, Control R and you can start searching. Okay, so if I actually that's not going to work because I'm not in a Git repository, but if I go up, if I want to modify that command so that I can do something different, say I want to go to the beginning of that line, I'll press Control A, which is the exact same command as Emacs. If I want to go to the end of the line, it's Control E, it's the same as an Emacs. If I want to go back a word, it's meta back, which is exactly the same as Emacs. So although there are key combinations that you need to learn in Emacs, and that's not necessarily that easy, you actually can get some more returns on that because it's all kind of baked in the shell. It's all ready to go.
So you can run those commands in the shell. Your Emacs navigation.
Well, the Emacs navigation is the same as as your default shell navigation. So learning how those work is quite useful. They talk about Emacs Pinky because you're always having to move your little finger around. So one of the first things that I always do when I get a new machine is to swap the control and the caps locks keys. I always do that because not only is it useful in Emacs, it's useful in the shell because you're always using control, to move around in the shell. So that's quite useful. The control key and the caps lock key, I just swap them in the keyboard mapping. So that means that because I don't know if I ever use the caps lock key when I'm typing at all. Like, why would I don't know. Yeah. So you just yeah. How do you get angry when you're talking to your colleagues? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's a very common thing.
What setup do you have to do to actually get a decent dev environment?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So what I've done here is so when I first started looking into this, I was like, right, I'm going to try and use this for all my Java coding, and that failed. Like I think when you're trying to use one of those higher order languages, I don't think I would recommend this for C#. I wouldn't recommend it for Java because I've tried that; it didn't really work. But I have opened up, for example, some JavaScript here, and so which has got some nice kind of coloring and some nice formatting. What can I say? So when you open up a file in Emacs, Emacs can kind of, I guess, treat that file differently depending on how you've set up Emacs and whether it will recognize something for you. And Emacs talks about modes, which is kind of how you want to work with that file. And they are listed down here at the bottom. So this tells you what modes I've got going. And I'm currently in my major mode is JavaScript IDE. So that tells you that I've loaded up a mode which recognizes this as JavaScript. And then there's some other minor modes in here as well, which allow me to do other bits and pieces as well. So I guess there's a huge number of contributions that people have made to the Emacs code base. This JavaScript mode is the best one that I know of, and this was written by Steve Y, the gentleman that I spoke to previously. He wrote this big kind of Emacs, the Emacs package, and they're all kind of published online, and you can just install them. So obviously you have to do a bit of googling to find out what's there. But the other thing to talk about is the only thing that is different is when I want to run a command. So I've just typed metax, and that's actually popped the cursor down here into a line which is called the mini buffer, where you can start to compose commands. So that takes a little bit of time to get used to, but that's where a lot of that is where, when you want to modify your environment, or when you want to run a command, often you'll end up there. If you get there and you don't mean to be, you press Control G and you're back. Oops, you're back to where you started. But I'm going to come down there and I'm going to say, so if you want to install something new, you say package, and it's got completions for me there. What do I want to do? I want to install a new package. So it'll tab complete, and then it'll say, okay, what do you want to install? And I'll say JS2, which is what I'm using there, and then it will say, actually, what do you mean by JS2? Because I've already got JS2 installed, it'll say, well, what else do you want to do? But I'll leave that for the moment. But anyway, suffice to say that there's a whole package management system there which you can use, and it's all just there, and you can list all the packages and you can install them, and that's all hunky-dory. So anyway, we'll get rid of all of that. I'll quit out of that. What that does give you, though, for example, so I thought it would be interesting to say, for example, and I've had to write this down because, as you all know, I'm not that much of a coder these days. But once you install these various packages, you can control variable. So there's a whole bunch of stuff which is you can get which other people have written for you. So now I can rename this that variable to test module name, and that kind of thing is all kind of baked into the product. Well, you can choose what you want and what you don't want by installing various packages. It is, of course, all integrated with Git as well. So there's there's kind of layers that you can put on top of that that integrates with Git, which is all fine. I guess when they talk about Emacs being an operating system, like anything, like any good system, you've got some. Oh man, it's been a tough day. So you've got all of your you've got all of those. Okay, maybe I won't play that one. I'll kill that. Oh, okay, anyway. Come back there. And I can. What else should I do? You can. I've got it. Let's see. You can browse. There's built-in web browser. So if you need to do, if you need to look something up, so this immediately takes you to a search. So I'm going to quickly search Stack Overflow for how to install Emacs. And it, of course, it uses DuckDuckGo because we're all into free software and not any of this proprietary rubbish. And then, how do I install Emacs on Windows? Oh, how would you even want to know that? But you can go down. And this is the other advantage of the other advantage of Emacs is because you are working in one place. Obviously, web pages are rendered better in a browser. I mean, that's a no-brainer. But the advantage that I've got here is because everything is a buffer, all of the standard buffer commands that you learn for editing text also work in anything else that you're working with as well. So like all of my page down commands all work as well. My search works again. So Windows, do I really want so all of these things just kind of work right out of the box because everything's unified in that place. There's an email. There's an email client that people rave about. I haven't quite got there yet, but I'm tempted to because Outlook's such a resource hog. We could be running that out of Emacs. So the idea is that pretty much anything you want to do, you can do it in Emacs. And so coming back to the joke is it's a great operating system. It just needs a decent editor. But anyway, that takes me to kind of halfway through. So, well, maybe any quick questions before I hand over to Mate?
How steep would you say the learning curve is?
It's a good question. I guess it's like anything in terms of the fact that you get out of it what you put into it, and it does take a while. I've taken the liberty. So this is the GNU Emacs ref card. And this has got the kind of the key takeaways that you need. I'm happy to send people a link. Yes, no, no. To be honest with you, the learning curve is steep. Like it's not something that you kind of just pick up and use. I don't think because it's also keyboard focused. It is really powerful, but it does mean that to really get into it, you kind of need to have these things sort of memorized and kind of in your muscle memory. Then they're very quick, but there's that overhead.
Where does it suck?
I think. I mean, for me, I mean, it's only ever going to give you a kind of a. I mean, you can do your colors and whatever, but it's always just going to be kind of simple text on a dark screen. So you're not going to get that kind of. You're not going to get any nice formatting out of it necessarily. So if you want to do anything on top of that, then you're not going to get that. It doesn't suck. Okay, actually, I'll tell you one thing. So currently, so every time you open something new, it comes into a buffer, and so I can easily open up the list of buffers that I've got. That's a long list, right? And kind of holding all of that in memory, like in your own personal memory of what am I doing? Where are all of my buffers? Okay, that's a bit of a challenge. You probably don't want all of those open at once. Like, I mean, they're all sitting there in memory, but like you don't want them all on your screen. You can open up more windows, but that's ultimately not going to that's not going to help you that much. So kind of keeping track of those is a bit of a challenge. I haven't.
What are you doing in PS Shell?
Well, I was looking for some JavaScript to show you guys how awesome it is at JavaScript. It's a good question. It's a very fair question. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Have you looked at your monitor recently?
Okay, last question. So Vim has like Vim Adventures and got like these other cool little games to like help you learn. Like, does Emacs have any fun ways of learning it?
Oh, that is a good question. I don't know. Not that I'm aware. Not that I've used myself.
You have to be serious about it. Can you get Emacs extensions on other editors? Like what's
I think so. Has anyone got IntelliJ open, or IDEA open? Does that have Emacs key bindings? I think you can, right? You can get Emacs key bindings. Yes. Yes, you can. There's evil mode. So we were talking about modes, which is and it's extended via interpretation layer or something like that. It's called evil mode. Emacs key bindings. Sure. Okay. Thanks, everyone. See. Goodbye.
I love the fact that your slides were in the browser. Websites.
Yeah. Up next we have Mark Pearl talking about this. Give it up to Mark.
Thank you. Okay. Is everyone done watching? So when I asked if I could speak about Vim, I was planning on preparing something, but I've had a really, really long week, and it's only Emacs, so. So I think it's worth. I really enjoyed Andrew's presentation because I saw a lot of parallels between the Vim world and the Emacs world, and I'd like to highlight those first because I think, like, ultimately, why do we care about these things? It's about being better at what we do. I think first to start off, and this is kind of a joke, Fazan, it's asking your question. You asked, what's the learning curve with Emacs? There is no learning curve with Vim. See, there is your learning curve for Emacs. There is no curve in the learning in Vim. It is just starts off at a certain level. But what does make me sad is a lot of us as software developers, we're only really utilizing our editor like a notepad. We're not realizing the power of navigation and how we can navigate effectively. So I want to start off with a little bit of a story. When I started, I came from a Windows background, and when you're working Windows, it's very GUI based. I was visual, well, it was VB6 at the time, so there's lots of mouse backwards and forwards, and you think that you're being productive. You think that you're being really great. And then I paired up with somebody that had learned ReSharper in Visual Studio, and they just flew like you cannot believe. Like, it was absolutely like code was just moving all over the place. Now, there's a place for tools like that. But after learning ReSharper a bit, there really aren't that many commands there. Like, there are a couple shortcuts you need to learn, and once you get that, you're pretty good. But you're still thinking about code in two ways. You're thinking in types of structures and trees. So like, does it compile? Are these methods and stuff like that? And then you're thinking of it in many ways like characters. So I want to move one character forward. I want to move to the end of the line. That's blocks of characters. Vim and Emacs really think of things in terms of text and how do you navigate text. So they, like Andrew's showing, you can move forward words and backwards words. You can move forward sentences and backwards sentences. You can move forward to line breaks. And that's a really, really powerful concept. So I'm going to show you a bit. I'm not going to take you through the history of them. But I want to highlight a couple of pros of it worth considering. The first is you'll find VI or a strain of VI on pretty much any operating system you work out of the box. And that means if you are working in and remoting on somebody's machine, you can be productive from day one. You have an editor that's always there that you can do something with. The other thing, and this is kind of the power of Emacs, but it's also the pitfall of Emacs, is the customizability. So every Emacs user has their own modules installed the way they want it, and they have their own way of working. The challenge with that is when a different Emacs user comes along, you've got to really map to how that machine is set up for that person. That's largely negated with VI and Vim, where there is a standard set of key sets that we use, and you're going to be productive as long as you know those keys are pretty much anywhere. So that being able to work universally is really, really useful. The other thing, and this for me is true, Vim is hard. It's really, really hard. It caused me months and months of pain to try and be productive. And that was extremely satisfying. It's just something about being challenged and going, oh, I wonder if I can do this. How do I figure that out? And really being stuck. And I think as software developers, we like to get stuck on problems and figure them out. And I got there when I started learning Vim. It was really hard initially. And then as you start powering up, you start seeing the productivity coming through. I like to think of it kind of like if you were a cook versus a chef. Cooks, you can use any tool, any knife to chop your food. Chefs are going to have the best equipment for them. And in all honesty, it doesn't matter whether it's Vim or Emacs, but having an editor that makes you really, really effective, as professional software developers, we should be embracing that. So one of the concepts that's really powerful is no mouse-driven development. Being able to write code and keep your hands on the keyboard all the time. Now, the beauty with Vim and the key mappings is you can get plugins for pretty much most tools. So for instance, with Chrome, I've got Vimium installed in Chrome, which means I can use most of the concepts in Vim just to navigate my browser. So if I want to go to that web browser wiki, I can do that. I can open that up. go back. If I want to search, I put my search command and I can go there. It allows you to navigate and keep your hands on the keyboard the whole time. And that's a huge productivity gain versus going to your mouse and backwards and forwards. Unfortunately, I'm getting a little rusty, so some of the keyboard things I forget, and then I have to revert back to the mouse. But embracing mouseless development will change your life as a software developer. I wanted to show you a bit of an image of a keyboard. Now, one of the big criticisms I have with Vim is the escape key. You use the escape key all the time to exit modes and move into other modes. And it's a bit of a historical thing. If you look at the modern day keyboard, escape has popped up at the top left. When Vim and VI were originating, the keyboards had escape kind of where caps lock or tab was. So it was in line with your hand, optimized. So very similar to Emacs, most serious Vim users will remap caps lock to be escape or to be control. Now, can everybody see that? Can I make that big enough? Can you see where my cursor is? So I'm going to just take you through a couple of things. I'm going to show you some tools that you can use around editing code that were like, when I got them, I was like, wow, that's actually really awesome. And I would struggle to do that otherwise. But this is just a snippet of it. So the first thing is to be aware that Vim has several distinct modes. The first mode is insert mode. And insert mode is what you would be used to with Notepad. So if you wanted to use your keys and just type and it does what you're expecting, you want to go into insert mode. And to get into insert mode, you press the I key. To exit insert mode, to go back to normal command mode, you would press escape. And that puts you into command mode. Command mode allows you to really use navigation commands. So for instance, I can go to the top of the file just by going GG. I can go to the bottom of the file by pressing G. I can go down 5, pressing 5 and the J button. I can go to the left. I can navigate by words. I can search. So if I wanted to just jump to the full stop there, I could just go F dot. You'll notice that I'm able to navigate my editor really, really quickly. And the power behind that is when you're coding with somebody, you don't want your editor to be the slowest part. You actually want to be faster in your editor navigating code than you can talk about things. And so getting these navigation keys and really mastering them allows you to work a lot more fluently as a software developer. Okay, so we've got command mode. We have visual mode. That really allows you to do selections. So it's not rendering too well there, but that would be the equivalent of selection. And you can do that in whichever way you want. So there's that I would expect of any decent editor these days. The other mode you have is command line mode. So command line, basically you can run any command from Vim. So I could do, so to get into command, you'd go escape, colon, and then type the command you want. Let's see, I hope I've got this right. So I could go ls, it's going to show me my directory listing, show me where my current directory is, etc., etc. Okay, so we spoke about hands-on keyboard. One of the most confusing things in Vim is how to navigate up, down, left, right, because we real Vimmers don't use the arrow keys. We use the keys in your normal normal keyboard area. So and it's become such of a muscle memory that I can't tell you what my up, down, left, right keys are. My brain just does it when I think up, down, left, right. But if I look there, it's H, J, K, L. Those are your up, down, left, right keys. Like most of these editors where you're trying to get past being mouse-driven development, it just starts at some point it just becomes a thing. Your brain thinks it and it happens on the screen. You don't consciously do it, but to get to that point, you've got to build that muscle memory. Now, one of the powerful concepts around Vim is composability. And this is one of the powerful concepts around Linux. And I think it's actually a fundamental design principle, which is being able to really specify very specific small commands and then build them up and compose them into sequences. So if I wanted to, I could go V for visual and $. I'd be composing a sequence of commands to get an action. That is a fundamental concept of Vim. And so you can build up these quite complex sequence of transformations by composing it of smaller actions and just building them up. So that's really, really useful. Like if we were working from Bash, we know about composability if we were going to go, okay, do a listing and delete all the files so you'd pipe things through. Very, very similar concept. Yes?
What's the difference between that and a macro?
I'll show you macros. Macros are a way to store complex composed commands and replay them. So that's where it gets a little fun. And I'll run you through it. I thought just as a kind of a nudge, we spoke about the Emacs bindings being in the terminal. Well, you can turn on Vim mode from your command line as well. So if I want to go to the beginning there, I do that. I can go back. You can do all of that in your command line as well. So what you can do in Emacs. But it's really useful. And whether you're using the Emacs key bindings or the Vim key bindings, I think that it just really improves your productivity. Now, let's see. So I spoke about navigation. There are lots of different ways to navigate. If I want to go to the beginning of the line, there is a command to do that. If I want to go to the end of the line, there's a command $. If I want to go back a word, I can do that. Let's go over here. Let's say I want to go to the opening bracket. I can toggle around, so I can do that, and I can do that. You can see how I can move my cursor around really, really quickly. Another common one, set another common one in Vim is to always have your line numbers on. And there are two types of line numbers. I have absolute line numbers put on, but also having relative. And you see the two sequences because you can go, okay, I want to go up 10, and you see that mapping over there. Now, I want to show you a macro and how a macro works. And so a macro is taking a sequence of commands and applying it to a bunch of text. So what would be, let's say I've got, let's just do that. Let's say I want to get, I don't know, I want to remove up to that symbol, and then I want to jump that word and remove the rest of the line, just so I have these this block of word here, and I want to apply it over lots of text. Now I'm going to do it over 10 lines, but imagine if you had a file with like 100 lines. I've had situations where you get into this legacy system and you just see the code, and you basically got to sit there, double click, cut, double click, cut, double click, cut, double click, cut, and you're doing that at however how many $100 an hour. It's really brain dead. You can do that in a couple seconds if you know how to use your tools properly. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna start recording a macro, and I'll record it in a memory. I think we call them registers 1, and I'm gonna say, well, my cursor's on the D, but I'm going to apply it to this whole block. So the first thing I want to do is move my cursor to the beginning of the line. So I press I don't know what the name, it's Shift 6 to get to the first character of the line. And then I want to go and clear forward to the, do we call that a less than? angle bracket. So something like that. Then what I want to do is I want to go to the next one, and I want to clear the rest of the line, right? So I've recorded that macro. It's still recording. I tell it to stop recording. I then select. I make the selection where I want to apply the macro, and it replays that sequence across it. So that's really powerful, right? Because we've removed this copy paste kind of mentality. You can now start looking at code in terms of words and blocks, and it doesn't matter if they're the same length of characters, if they're slightly longer. You can really navigate along those lines. Okay, so those are macros, and you can build macros up with any sequence. Yes, it was on it.
Does Vim support, with the exception of doing a macro, does it support multi-line editing, similar to like Visual Studio and Management Studio?
What do you mean by multi-line editing?
Exactly what you did without a macro. I can just put these
Yes,
lines
yep,
on
yep,
here, this,
yep,
and that.
yep, you can. Yeah. Another one I wanted to show you is the global command, because I think the global command is really, really useful. Let's say this was written in C#, and we're wanting to actually do it in Python. And so we're like, crumbs, man, we've got these opening and closing braces that are going to be an absolute pain. I don't want to have to go through the whole document. Like, how do I tell it to remove it? Well, there are a couple ways. So I'm going to do the global command, and let's see. Something you become really familiar with in Vim is regex, because we use regex for doing pattern recognition. So you really get to know regex. I'm still getting better and better at regex, but I'm going to say I want to do that, and I just want to delete wherever in the file, I want to delete that opening brace. And then I'm going to do something similar. Okay. So now what it's done, okay, and then I want to go something like, let's say I want to remove the private static part, and instead of that, I want to put Bob. G/, and we go private static / I'm in command. I want to go DW, I think it's DW. Let's do that. Okay, maybe I'm being too ambitious there. Let's go. I'll change it. I'm going to delete blank lines. So let's go. G/. Okay, so now I've deleted all blank lines in my in this file. That's really powerful. When you start thinking of code in terms of like these things, then you can start doing some pretty cool transformations. There are other ways of skinning a cat. So as developers, we would normally use, in a typical editor, we'd use like find and replace. We can do similar things in Vim. Of course, we want to make it a challenge. So we're typing in the replace sequence at the bottom there. And let's say I want to go and I want to replace register with hello, GC. There we go. Let's say I wanted to search for wherever there's the word D. And so forth. So there's a lot of built in the box functions for navigating text and making changes. I spoke briefly about regex. Like, so if you're not familiar with regex, I'd really encourage that you invest some time in it, because you're going to get leverage from being able to use regex to make transformations going forward. Okay. Questions? No. and I wouldn't want to, because I think that's it. it's a very different approach to solving a similar problem. I think what Andrew says with Emacs, it's really an operating system inside an operating system, which doesn't make sense. I think one thing that is fun, and if you are wanting to try Vim or get better at it, playing Vim Golf is a lot of fun. For those that aren't familiar with Vim Golf, it's best done in pairs. So you pair program with somebody else, and whenever you do something, you see you can do it in the least number of commands. And if your pair can do it in fewer commands than you, they get the keyboard. And you keep going like that. That was one way that we used to have a lot of fun learning Vim, because it is a learning curve, and you have to build that muscle memory up. And you start realizing how slow you are in navigating things and getting better and better, because your buddy's going, oh wait, I can do that in one command. You're like, come on, show me, like, prove it. Other questions? Yes. I wish I could get a Vim Excel plugin. I would. I tell you, the problem is when you create the muscle memory you see a lot of value in that. So that brings you down the road of starting to invest in fancy keyboards that become really expensive. So something that I have a thing for, apparently, is getting fully programmable keyboards that are programmable on the keyboard. And the first thing I do is I map a layer on it where I emulate the JKL up, down, left, right on the keyboard. And what that allows me to do is I can pair with somebody that doesn't have Vim as their default editor and still be kind of productive. The downside of becoming a Vimmer is when you pair with somebody that doesn't use Vim and you're really wanting to impress them, and you're like, okay, and they just start seeing that because you're trying to navigate, but you forget that there are arrow keys for it. That's when you know that you have a problem. And that happens quite a bit. So what I would say, though, is who here uses Vim, kind of? There are a couple of hands. Okay, so we've got way more Emacs, way more Vim users here than we have Emacs users. It makes sense to go with what the majority is using.
Collaboration, not consensus.
Because literally, I think you're going to get the same bang for buck out of both of them, but it's going to be extremely painful if you're pairing with somebody that comes from this other world, right? So we need to. This is where being having an editor preference really makes a big difference. And what you'll find with a lot of dev places where they get into this, they become either a Vim shop or an Emacs shop, because trying to mix the two becomes really, really painful.
It's not too late to turn the tide, by the way.
Yes.
I've got a question for both of you. As someone who hasn't invested in either, why would I invest in Vim other than following the crowd? Or why would I invest in Emacs?
Did you not just hear my talk?
I don't have temperance.
We've just been speaking about this for 45 minutes.
I'm gonna have two fun facts for you guys. So maybe I'll answer the question. The first fun fact that most of guys know Lucas, right? The first week that I come here to work with Lucas said, "Oh shit, your developing environment is unfriendly for other people. I can't use it."
Yeah.
And it gets so angry.
Yeah.
Okay, the second, so I got some musculoskeletal disorder on this wrist. So 5 years ago, I can't use mouse, so I changed to use Vim. It's killed my.
Vim killed you. It's gonna ruin and save you.
Yes.
Which one's easier to uninstall?
Vim is there.
I would actually, I think I can put a decent argument for this. I would say Vim is easier to uninstall because all you'll lose is your editor. If you uninstall Emacs, you lose your web browser, you lose Tetris, you lose your email clients.
No one's ever asked me a question about Emacs.
Other questions? Yeah. No.
So like you showed us how with Vim you can manipulate text, but as developers we use IDEs, and those IDEs like they take into the context of what language you're working with. So
Yeah.
how is this more beneficial than an IDE?
Yeah, good question. So there are a couple benefits that IDEs, well, what do we mean by an IDE is probably a good place to start. Like when I hear IDE, I think of something that has a map of how the code is built and the tree structure, so you can kind of navigate by the types and things like that. So there's some really powerful benefits about having that and being able to go move this method to this class and know that it's been done in a safe way. And so I see real benefits for like tools like ReSharper when you're doing safe refactorings. If you don't know what safe refactorings are, go and invest some time in learning them, because they're different from normal refactorings and they will change your lives once you get on top of them. So that said, there are some languages that don't compile. So I would go like JavaScript, Python. Those languages, you can be just as productive in either. I really like to use the best tool for the job. So I will default to my text editor if I'm making textual changes. If I'm going into a heavy refactoring mode, I'll probably open up an IDE to leverage that. Although you can still get like pseudo IDE recognition in Vim. So like I can go and say, drill down from this to the method declaration, it will take me there. I don't know, what's it like in Emacs?
I mean, probably the same. I mean, in terms of something a little bit more heavyweight like C# or Java, I probably recommend it. But again, same kind of thing with that JavaScript implementation I was showing you before. That uses Mozilla Rhino under the hood, and it builds up an syntax tree. So the refactorings that you get out of that are very powerful, and it's using the same kind of JavaScript engine that your browser will use. So it's quite accurate. I mean, but I guess this is that difference, right? Is that if you're willing to invest in Emacs, people have built these things out. There's like 12,000 lines of Lisp code that I could never dream of writing, but someone else has built it, and you can sort, you can go with it.
I think one thing worth calling out, like while we're talking about it, is remote pairing. So with a text editor, you're only sending text over the wire, and that can be a really fast and fluid experience. If you're working in a heavy IDE where they haven't optimized it, and we're seeing some progress in IDEs to allow it, it can be a very slow experience. So like a combination of Vim and Emacs works really, really nicely, because you get all the power of an editor, and now it's super fast when you're working remotely. So it would be something worth.
I have a nice Emacs setup. If you guys want to look at
Brown bag.
Yeah, brown bag.
Yeah, Emacs is definitely was really interesting.
Could you guys follow this up with both of you trying to book a meeting in your editor of choice?
Trying to book.
Do it in Outlook.
I actually found a Slack plugin for Vim. So now while you're in the terminal, you can like access your Slack channel, send messages.
There's definitely a mail and calendar client in Emacs. I'll take you up on that.
So are we waiting to see him send us an invite?
So I totally see the benefits of having your operating system that you can port. Cause think about it this way: like you get productive in that. You can work in Mac, you can work in Windows. It doesn't matter, because you've got this abstraction layer on top. And one of the best developers I've ever worked with was an Emacs person, but there was only one. And he ran Evil as well. So there's pros and cons. What was like SpaceX? SpaceMax is a good one to try and get started in.
I use Space.
Yeah.
It saves you hating life trying to get them actually working.
Yeah.
There's some editor also that started on the premise of being a code editor like VS Code is, but they started from baseline, so everything just plugs on top of that.
Yeah.
It's quite cool. So you get your syntax highlighting and everything out the box.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite possible. I like the take home for me from this is like no mouse driven development is a really, really powerful concept. And like investing in understanding your tooling deeper will change your life. It just makes a big difference. So, and then of course, like you want to use them. Like that's the best one.
Unless you've got Emacs installed, and then you'll use it.
So I think that's it. We've hit
we've
hit time.
Yeah, thanks, Mark and Andrew. That was pretty good. You gave us some stuff to think about. Yeah, if anyone wants to do a brown bag, just contact me or